Good afternoon, YouTube. Tire Metalhead Weatherman here. Hopefully, you guys are doing well today. So, things look like they're going to be relatively quiet today, this Monday, but tomorrow looks like it has the potential for not only a very big severe weather day, but also a very nasty severe weather day. I just got home from work and I've been kind of monitoring things pretty closely here, and this is not looking. It's not looking great. It's looking pretty ugly, actually. So let's go ahead and take a look at things here. We have two enhanced risk areas, one of which is towards the Gulf Coast, more so towards the southeast. New Orleans, Mobile, Biloxi, you guys are involved in this area a bit more. But my real concern has been this area over here, and this is an area originally that was kind of under the radar, so to speak. But over the last couple of days, I've been starting to side eye it a little bit more. And what I've noticed is there was an increased amount of cape over this region, and there was also a pretty strong wind profile and subtle forcing. If those parameters were to come together over that region, it could have been a problem, and looks like we're starting to see a scenario in which that could be the case. Hopefully, this ends up being wrong, but if it's not, this could be very nasty in its own right. So, we're going to cover both areas, but I'm mainly going to start out with this area because I think this is an area that has a high chance of some intense tornadoes, even possibly. It exists in both areas if we go over the tornado outlook here. There's two hatched risk areas. There's one over towards New Orleans and Biloxi, Mobile, you're in that as well. But this area right here, I'm very concerned about it because there hasn't been as much media coverage with this. We've known for a couple of days now what's to be expected here. This area, not so much. And just this morning is when we got the upgrade from pretty much marginal to enhanced risk. So it says a lot. But there's definitely good reason behind why they did that. Let's also not forget that this also has a very prevalent damaging wind threat. That is mainly going to be based over towards the Gulf Coast around New Orleans to Mobile. And parts of the panhandle of Florida are involved in that enhanced area as well, in this 30% region. We also can't forget that slight risk is not to be trifled with as well. This goes all the way into southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, and of course back towards Texas. So tornadoes are not the only threat with this. Damaging winds are as well. There is a flood threat with this as well, but we're mainly going to focus on the severe weather here. Hail threat is going to be mainly based with these storms yielding the higher cape values and more cape-rich environment. So we're mainly going to be looking more so towards Texas on this one. So let's start out by looking at the vorticity map here. And you'll kind of get an idea of what I've been talking about. So when we move this forward here, here's our system coming in. And storms are actually expected to start firing earlier in the day. Not so much around 7, but here's our low right here. Pretty stout low, might I say, as well. But look at how those isobars are not super close together. There's actually quite a bit of space between them. This is more vigorous forcing right here whenever you see these lines in close like this, but over here it's a little bit more spread out. Subtle forcing is more ideal for discrete supercells, which would mean that the tornado threat, or really all hazard types, increase. The threat for all hazard types increase. So we end up seeing, and it's not until probably late in the day where that forcing becomes really apparent, but still it's subtle enough to allow for storms to have room to breathe and really grow and thrive. And as this goes on, it's not really until later where this starts to move off to the east here and we get stronger forcing. Eventually, this is going to transition into a linear threat, but there's still going to be a pretty amped tornado threat over in this region because there's still a good bit of subtle forcing over this region as well, because you can see where those isobars are a little bit more spread out. This is us looking more so towards the overnight hours towards Alabama, towards southern Alabama, and those lines are spread out once again. So we'll have to keep an eye on this region. Could be some more activity to the north, but I think temperatures won't be yielding to a degree as far as potential is concerned. the warm sector is pretty far to the south, so the further north you get, the less chance you have for severe storms. But this is still a pretty gnarly setup, especially for January, no less. This is a setup that you would see more so towards the springtime. So let's start to get into the nitty gritty here. We'll start out with the temperature, the temperature model here, if it'll behave. Sheesh. So here we are looking at the temperature, and you can kind of start to see things begin to unfold as we get into the lunchtime hour. Here is our temperatures right around here. This is the southern sector of Texas towards the Gulf Coast. We're getting into those 70s. Still a little bit of daytime heating left to go here, but you can see this little strip here. This is right where our enhanced risk region is. We got temperatures in the 60s and the 70s. And this warm sector does spread a little bit further out to the east, but it stays pretty confined. Like you can see that warm nose continuing to move off to the east, right around New Orleans, about, I'd say close, not necessarily close to midnight, but just about maybe 10 o'clock, 11 around that region. And then as we move that forward, that moist sector continues to progress off to the east, and we'll be reaching southern Alabama by probably just after midnight, I'd say, maybe a little bit later. And then we'll start to lose those dynamics as time goes on into the early morning hours of Wednesday. We look at the dew points, and this is where things really start to become a little bit more concerning. We don't necessarily have to have like super amped temperatures, not anything above like 70, 75. That usually is always going to be a red flag, but that isn't always the case. It's usually a combination of temperature and dew point. And what we end up seeing here, and I need to go back and show the time, is already by 7 a.m., we're already getting those dew points into the 50s and 60s over in this region here. And watch what happens once we get to about 19Z. We're starting to flirt with those 70s in this region. And as a result, the severe weather threat is really going to be amped up by this point. Plenty of fuel for this to work with, and as a result, you'll see a correlation with the CAPE values increasing. Whenever you see something like this, it's always a telltale sign. And then we do see that moist sector continue to work its way off to the east. This is also why I think there's an increased tornado threat around Louisiana as well. New Orleans, unfortunately, it looks like you're in there again. I'm really sorry that you guys keep having to go through this. I hate it for you guys. But as this goes on, that warm sector does persist, even though those temperatures will start to fade as we've lost the daytime heating. And then in Mississippi and Alabama, it will be your turn. Trying to get this off of here. Oh boy. There we go. But southern Mississippi, we're watching you guys, and then southern Alabama, the panhandle of Florida, we're watching you guys as we start to work into the early morning hours of Wednesday. So now let's go ahead and progress onward to some of the more prevalent dynamics. Actually, we're going to go ahead and look at the low-level jet. And this is a very key element in regards to tornadic development. And when we take a look at this, this is what really has gotten my attention with this setup pretty much from the get-go over both of these regions. I would say so, especially more so towards this sector here. But look, this kind of slipped under the radar for a lot of us, especially towards Texas here. Look at where this, over the time that the storm system comes in right here, look at this jet streak that pops up here. This is what's really concerning about that, because this is also how that moisture flow is getting in. We're getting surface and low-level moisture coming in. And by the time we get this into the afternoon hours, look at that. We're getting a near 60-knot jet by lunchtime. So these storms will have plenty of shear to work with. They're going to have plenty of moisture to work with over in this region. The temperatures are going to be nice and ripe. This has the look of a big day if these parameters come together. There could be some inhibiting factors, but right now I'm not really seeing too many of those. There is a small there is a small capping inversion over there, but I think with that storm system being as close as it is, that cap will break, but it will be broken in increments, which is never a good sign whenever you're looking at parameters like these. So hopefully the cap doesn't quite will hold up just a little bit longer, so that way these storms don't end up being as prevalent and we have maybe a smaller window. But I do think at some point this cap ends up breaking. These storms are going to take advantage of this environment, and there could be a couple of tornadoes. So now we've looked at that. We'll watch this progress off to the east. And I've kind of been talking about this for a while. Low level jet is super prevalent in this situation, especially towards Mississippi and Alabama. Look at this sector where we're sitting at almost 70 knots. And with this, you don't even need a high cape yielding event in order to really get massive severe weather out of this. And this persists even as it goes further off to the south and east. So even if you don't get severe weather, places like maybe Atlanta, Birmingham, you guys could be still seeing some pretty strong winds with some hefty rain. And it's also going to be a chilly rain for areas further to the north here. So still could make for some really miserable conditions tomorrow on Wednesday, so to speak. So we'll still keep an eye on that, but also there is a marginal risk, and we'll probably talk about that maybe tomorrow. But we all know what's going to be taking precedence in this video here. So now let's go ahead and actually take a look at the Cape values, and I'll show you the difference between what's going on in Texas versus what's going on over towards the Gulf Coast around New Orleans, etc. So make sure you guys can see the time zone, and this is when we get into the early afternoon hours. Here's a key difference. We'll get Cape values around 500 over here as we move this forward. All right, so we see that. And then when we go back over to here, let's rewind this back a little bit, and look at that. So the gray is Cape values that are usually under 1,000 joules per kilogram. We're getting close to 1,500 over here. Like I said, the atmosphere in this region is amped up. And as a result, the tornado threat here, I think, is going to be a bit higher than what it's going to be over here. There is some Cape that does seem to persist around this region, but it's almost half of what we're seeing over in Texas. But given the dynamics, I don't think that having Cape that's about maybe 1,000 joules or a little bit less is going to make a huge difference. And it's not to say that this can't uptick a bit too. So we have to keep an eye on it. With enough moisture and enough wind shear, this isn't necessarily irrelevant, but it makes for a situation in which storms will still have plenty of punch in its own right. The Cape will just help fuel it a little bit further. So now that we know about our low-level jet, our pretty much our entire slim factor here, let's get into where things really start to get interesting, so to speak, and a little bit alarming, so to speak, and that's the significant tornado parameter. So we move this forward here, and the threats still exist around this region. But again, we got to talk about Texas, because this is heading into the afternoon hours. We're already starting to get numbers popping up here, mainly 1s and 2s. But look what happens once we get into the early afternoon here. We're already getting into 2s, and a couple areas even getting into 3. And then look what happens as we push this even further forward, about 20Z. Things start to get really ominous around here. I'm going to show you a hortiograph and a skew T-chart sounding. And this is where things get really concerning here. Pretty stout hortiograph for this time of year especially. Very strong helicity. But what I want you to pay extra close attention to is this right here. When it looks at the this particular hortiograph here, notice those letters in purple. I know they're hard to see, but they end up saying classic supercell. And if you've watched any of my videos about severe weather development on my Weather Nerd 101 list, you know what this means. And given the environment, and you can look at these barbs here, you can see the change of wind direction in height, and also the variance in wind speed. This is a pretty alarming setup. So you might want to take this seriously if you're on the Texas Gulf Coast region. So I don't want to hear about anyone disregarding tornado warnings on this one, because this might not be a setup to play with. And then if you look at this sounding here, look at that. 563 meters squared per second squared. This is a hordeograph you see with much more intense tornado outbreaks. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I am trying to drive the hammer home that this is not something to mess with. If this ends up yielding what is being predicted right now, this is going to be a huge problem. So make sure that you have your plan of action in place ahead of time. Do not wait until the last minute. And here's another great example. This is a significant tornado parameter. This is sitting on a 5. It's a pretty high yielding number, and basically with a 5, you can even expect the potential of maybe even an EF4 tornado. Chances of that, the odds of it happening, yes, they are low, but why take the chance if you don't have to? That's my main thing. So that being said, let's go ahead and move this along, and we'll get an idea of what's going to happen as we push this further to the east. Of course, as I said, the dynamics aren't going to be quite as abundant over this region, but tornado threats still can't be ruled out, especially over towards New Orleans. Seeing more so 1s and 2s, and then this threat does try to ramp back up just a tiny bit over southern Alabama. I don't know why I couldn't get that out. Look at the difference, though. There is a decent helicity with this, by the way, but this has... Oh, wow, that's actually a very strong helicity. Oh, my goodness. This is pretty stout in its own right. So, again, look at the lower Cape value as a difference, too. Cannot get stuff off my screen. But look at the difference in low Cape value here. Looking at 836 joules per kilogram. Almost half of what we were seeing over towards Texas. But with the shear being as prevalent as it is over here, that's not going to matter. Storm relative helicity is sitting at 421 meters squared per second squared. But this right here, when you see this kind of curvature, that's very alarming. This also has that classic supercell indicator on here as well, which is really alarming in its own right. Not to mention, this has the look of a nocturnal threat. So this could be going on while you're sleeping over here towards southern Alabama. So again, whether you are in Texas, Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, you need to be watching this really closely, because these could be very dangerous if things stay as they are right now. And with it being as close as it, and with the timing being as close as it is, and uptrending, I don't know, man. It doesn't look great. So make sure that you have a plan of action. Make sure you have a way to be woken up at night if you're over in this area here. And just make sure, and if you're in this area here, just make sure you're watching the weather throughout the day, because conditions are more than likely going to be deteriorating. So now that we've finished that out, let's go ahead and take a final look at the reflectivity here. So here we are. Excuse me. And you can actually, interestingly enough, you'll see the severe threat around this region. Excuse me. Wow. You see the severe threat around this region. And then right on the back side of this, you'll see snow. And this is where the dynamics really came together for this. All that forcing that was created by this low and is bringing in that moisture and snow ends up popping off storms over in this region. Here's where that low ends up forming, and right around that southern sector of this, that southeastern sector, that's where we have to watch for the threat of embedded supercells and prefrontal storms. And then as time goes on, secondary area prefrontal storms form, and embedded supercells are in here as well. And then as we watch this go on, this starts to break apart just a little bit, but not before having a little bit more increased tornado potential throughout southern Alabama here. I'll probably touch up on this again tomorrow morning just to make sure we have the timing exactly perfect. But regardless of the timing, just make sure you are prepared for any mode of severe weather. Make sure you're ready to take shelter and you have the essentials that you need once the storm passes. So I know I've been rambling on here. It's enough rambling for me for one night or for one afternoon or evening. Again, please take this seriously because this could end up being very nasty. Let's hope that that's not the case. But if you liked anything I did in the video, by the way, definitely, of course, drop a like. Definitely subscribe if you haven't. Please share this video to anyone that you know is in these regions. And, of course, if you want to leave your thoughts in the comments, definitely do so. But this has been Tire Metalhead Weatherman. I will see you guys in the next video, probably tomorrow morning. Till then, take care. Stay weather aware.